Destiny is supposed to have the final say, yet for these 10 people, fate threw disaster after disaster at them, then watched them walk away. A Dutch cyclist books 2 tickets, dodges 2 doomed Malaysia Airlines flights, and survives by saving a few $100s. A woman plummets 33,000 feet and lives. Lightning blasts a park ranger not once but 7 impossible times, and still can't take him. The odds? So astronomical, most statisticians would call them impossible. These aren't just stories of luck, they're proof that sometimes even destiny can't finish the job. How did the universe let them slip through the cracks? And could it happen to you? Martin de Jonge never set out to tempt fate. In 2014, the Dutch cyclist was living out of a suitcase, racing for Malaysia's Terengganu team and chasing points across continents. That March, he was planning to fly to the Tour de Taiwan. His teammates booked tickets on Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, the one that would vanish without a trace over the Indian Ocean. But de Jonge, always looking to save a little money and time, found a cheaper flight that left half an hour earlier, skipping the Beijing layover. He chatted with travelers waiting to board MH370, wished them luck, and walked away. The world would soon be searching for 239 missing souls. 4 months later, de Jonge was heading back to Malaysia from Amsterdam. He bought a direct ticket on MH17, the same airline, the same route. Then he noticed a $400 difference. Flying through Frankfurt would save him almost a third of the fare. He changed his booking. On July 17th, MH17 was shot down over Ukraine, killing all 298 on board. Twice in 4 months, de Jonge's ordinary cost-cutting choices put him in the shadow of 2 of the deadliest flights in history. He didn't have a premonition. He didn't check the news. He just wanted to avoid a layover, then save some cash. The odds of switching off both doomed flights? Statisticians say it's so rare it's almost incalculable, millions to 1, if not higher. Yet the only thing separating him from disaster was a few clicks and a bit of thrift. For de Jonge, destiny didn't just blink once, it missed him twice. On a cold December night in 1979, Elvita Adams made her way to the Empire State Building's 86th floor. The wind was howling, gusting between 23 and 38 miles per hour, funneled by the building's jagged setbacks. Adams, facing eviction and mounting bills, climbed over the 8-foot fence. She jumped. Instead of plummeting 1,000 feet to the street, a powerful gust caught her midair. The wind slammed her sideways, flinging her onto a 3-foot-wide ledge just 1 floor below. A fractured pelvis was the price, but she was alive. Security guard Frank Clark, hearing her cries, pulled her in through a window. The city's weather service logged the wind speeds that night, conditions that, by chance, made survival possible. 3 decades later, another New Yorker stepped off the edge. In 2010, Thomas McGill leaped from the 39th floor of a West End Avenue apartment building. He fell at an estimated 126 miles per hour, feet first, straight down. But parked below was a red Dodge Charger. McGill crashed through the back windshield and landed in the rear seat, the car's steel frame and crumple zones absorbing the force. Witnesses found him conscious, legs shattered but somehow breathing. The car's owner, Guy McCormick, returned to find the roof caved in and glass everywhere, his rosary beads still hanging from the mirror. Doctors rebuilt McGill's legs with rods and pins. Months later, he was walking again. 2 falls, 2 lives saved not by design, but by the city's architecture, a gust of wind, and a chance alignment of steel and glass. Sometimes, fate gets tangled in the mechanics of the modern world. Roy Sullivan worked as a park ranger in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park, a place where summer storms roll in almost daily and the ridges attract bolts from the sky. Over a span of 35 years, Sullivan was struck by lightning not once, not twice, but 7 separate times, a number that earned him a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records and a reputation that followed him everywhere he went. The first strike came in 1942, inside a fire lookout tower without a lightning rod. The tower burst into flames. Sullivan ran for the door and was hit just as he escaped, leaving a half-inch burn down his leg and a hole in his shoe. Decades passed before the next round. In 1969, Lightning found him again, this time inside his truck. The bolt shot through an open window, singed off his eyebrows, and set his hair ablaze. Sullivan staggered out, dazed but alive. The following summer, he was struck in his own front yard. A year later, lightning hit him indoors at the ranger station, setting his hair on fire for a second time. By then, Sullivan carried a jug of water everywhere just in case, but the storms kept coming. In 1973, he was struck while driving through the park. 2 years later, lightning found him on foot, burning his ankle. The final strike came in 1977 while he was fishing. Bolt to the head, burns down his chest and stomach. Each time he survived. Each time he bore the scars. His hat, burned through by one of the strikes, now sits in a glass case in New York. Sullivan died at 71, outlasting the odds by a margin no statistician could explain. 7 times marked, 7 times spared. If luck is a pattern, his was one nature couldn't break. On December 24, 1971, Julian Kepka sat in a window seat as Lanza Flight 508 cut through the sky over Peru. The plane was cruising at 21,000 feet when a crack of lightning split the fuselage open. In an instant, the cabin disintegrated around her. Kepka, just 17, found herself strapped to a row of seats, tumbling out of the storm-torn ski. She was falling 2 miles, over 10,000 feet, into the Amazon rainforest below. The descent should have been impossible to survive, but the seat cluster spun as it dropped, creating drag much like a maple seed helicoptering to Earth. The dense jungle canopy stretched out beneath her, a tangled net of branches and leaves. Experts later estimated that the seat's auto-rotation, combined with the cushion of thick foliage, slowed her fall just enough to make survival possible. The impact shattered her collarbone and left her dazed but alive. Around her, the wreckage was scattered and silent. For 11 days, Kepka moved through the rainforest, guided by instincts sharpened by years at her parents' research station. She followed water downstream, recalling advice her father had given her as a child. If you get lost, find a river and keep walking. Each step was a test of endurance. Her right arm was gashed and infested with maggots, her shoes lost, her vision blurred by a swollen eye. She rationed a small bag of candy, the only food she could find amid the debris. The Amazon is not forgiving. Insects swarmed, rain fell in sheets, but Kepke's knowledge of the forest and her ability to keep moving kept her alive long enough to stumble upon a camp used by a local lumberman. 11 days after the fall, she was rescued, the only survivor out of 92 on board. The physics of her fall, the structure of the seat, the density of the forest, each played a part, but it was her will to keep moving that finished the equation. On January 26, 1972, a Yugoslav flight attendant named Vesna Vulovic boarded JAT Flight 367, expecting a routine journey from Copenhagen to Belgrade. She wasn't even supposed to be on the flight. Her name had been mixed up with another Vesna's on the crew roster. 46 minutes after takeoff, a bomb exploded in the baggage compartment, tearing the DC-9 apart at 33,333 feet above Czechoslovakia. Passengers and crew were hurled into the winter sky. Vulovic, pinned by a food cart in the tail section, stayed inside as the fuselage broke away. The tail spun through the air, slammed into a snowy hillside, and came to rest in a dense forest outside the village of Srbska Kamenice. The snow, trees, and angle of impact absorbed just enough of the force to keep her alive. Local villager Bruno Honka pulled her from the wreckage, finding her with a fractured skull, 2 broken legs, and a crushed pelvis. She spent 27 days in a coma and more than a year in the hospital. Investigators confirmed the altitude, 33,333 feet, earning her a Guinness World Record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. Experts credit a rare mix of physics: the tail section's tumble, the thick snow, and her own low blood pressure, which made her pass out before impact, sparing her heart from bursting. Vulovic never remembered the fall. She returned to work at JAT, walking with a limp, and became a social hero. No other human has survived a free fall from such a height. Her story remains a singular entry in the record books. a descent from cruising altitude that should have been a death sentence and instead left her somehow alive. On August 16, 1987, Northwest Airlines Flight 255 lifted off from Detroit just before nightfall. Seconds later, the MD-80 clipped a light pole, sheared through a rental car building, and burst into flames along Middle Belt Road. Fire and twisted metal stretched for half a mile. In the chaos, first responders combed through the wreckage, expecting no survivors among the 156 souls on board and ground. Then, a firefighter spotted something impossible, a tiny hand reaching out from beneath an overturned seat. 4-year-old Cecilia Sechan was still strapped in, upside down, her body shielded by the collapsed seat shell. She had burns on her arms and legs, a fractured skull, and a broken collarbone. But she was alive. Investigators studied the crash for answers. The seat's position, wedged between wreckage, might have created a pocket where the force of the impact and fire passed her by. Some wondered if her mother, seated beside her, had instinctively shielded her at the last moment. The truth remains elusive. Every other passenger and crew member perished. Cecilia alone emerged from the devastation, silent and scarred, carried from the scene by a young firefighter who would never forget the moment. Experts still struggle to explain what physics could not predict. Why, out of so many, only one child survived. Years later, Cecilia's scars remain, a small airplane tattooed on her wrist, a quiet reminder of a night that defied all logic. Her survival is a mystery that lingers, a question with no answer, suspended between tragedy and miracle. Truman Duncan worked on the railroads in Cleburne, Texas, a job that demanded focus and precision. On June 13, 2006, he was riding the front of a rail car as it edged toward a repair dock. A slip, a misstep. Suddenly, he was on the tracks with 20 tons of steel rolling straight at him. The train dragged him 75 feet. Its wheels cut through his midsection, severing his body nearly in half. Most of his pelvis was destroyed. One kidney was lost. His left leg was gone and his right was hanging by a thread of muscle. He should have died instantly. Instead, Duncan stayed awake. He reached for his phone, dialed 911, and calmly described his condition. The dispatcher heard a man, voice steady, reporting that he had been run over by a train and needed help now. After making the call, he phoned his family, knowing the odds. Paramedics arrived to find him conscious, bleeding out, but still talking. Doctors performed 23 surgeries over the next 4 months. They rebuilt what they could, inserted metal rods, and fought infection and shock. Duncan's will to live never wavered, even as he faced the reality of life without a pelvis or legs. He returned to work behind a desk, refusing to let the accident define him. For trauma surgeons, his survival remains a case study, proof that sometimes the mind's refusal to quit can keep the body going when nothing else should. Duncan's story isn't just about what the body can endure, but what a person can choose to fight for, minute by minute. In August 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was finishing a business trip in Hiroshima, working as an engineer for Mitsubishi. On August 6th, he stepped out into the morning sun and saw a B-29 bomber overhead. In the next instant, a flash of white light swallowed the city. The bomb detonated less than 2 miles from where he stood. The blast ruptured his eardrums, burned his face and arms, and left him temporarily blind. He staggered through a city flattened by heat and shockwaves, then boarded a train, bandaged, dazed, and alive, back to his hometown of Nagasaki. 3 days later, Yamaguchi walked into the Mitsubishi office, still wrapped in makeshift dressings. He tried to describe what he had seen in Hiroshima, but his supervisor dismissed the story as impossible. Then, a second flash lit up the sky. The windows shattered. The reinforced stairwell where he and his colleagues stood shielded them from the worst of the blast. Once again, Yamaguchi survived. Radiation sickness set in quickly, high fevers, vomiting, patches of hair falling out. His wife was exposed to radioactive rain. Their children would later suffer health problems, all traced back to those days. Yet, Yamaguchi recovered, raised his family, and lived to see his 93rd birthday. He carried the scars of both bombs and the memory of 2 cities erased in an instant. Yamaguchi's life became a living record of what it means to endure history's most destructive force, not once, but twice. In 1848, a railroad foreman named Phineas Gage was blasting rock for the Rutland and Burlington line near Cavendish, Vermont. He packed explosive powder into a drilled hole with a heavy iron rod, over 3 feet long, weighing 13 pounds. The powder sparked. The rod shot upward with the force of a cannon, entered below his left cheekbone, and exited through the top of his skull. It landed more than 20 yards away. Gage didn't just survive the blast. He stood up, spoke clearly, and rode in a cart to the town doctor, holding his own bleeding head. The wound destroyed much of his brain's left frontal lobe. For weeks, infection and fever threatened to finish what the rod had started. But Gage recovered. He lived another 12 years, traveling and working as a stagecoach driver in Chile. Yet something had changed. Friends and family said he was no longer the same man, impatient, impulsive, his old charm gone. Doctors began to wonder, could an injury to the brain change a person's character? Gage's case became a medical landmark, the first real evidence that our thoughts and personalities are rooted in the brain's physical matter. His battered skull and the iron rod are still displayed at Harvard Medical School, silent witnesses to a life that rewrote the boundaries of survival and forced science to reconsider what makes us who we are. In Croatia, Fran Selak's life reads like a dare to the laws of probability. In 1962, he was riding a train through the mountains when it jumped the tracks and plunged into an icy river. 17 passengers drowned. Selak broke his arm, swam to shore, and watched the wreckage sink. The following year, he boarded a plane bound for Rijeka. Mid-flight, a malfunction blew the door open. He was sucked out without a parachute while the aircraft crashed, killing 19. Selak landed in a haystack and walked away with minor injuries. In 1966, a bus he was riding skidded off the road and into a river. 4 people died. Selak surfaced, coughing water, and made it to land. His car caught fire in 1970. He leaped out just before the fuel tank exploded. 3 years later, another car fire. This time, flames shot through the air vents and singed off his hair. In 1995, he was hit by a city bus in Zagreb. He survived with bruises. The next year, he drove off a mountain road to avoid a truck, jumped clear as his car plunged 300 feet, and watched it explode below. 7 disasters, 7 escapes. For Selak, the numbers never added up, but fate, it seemed, just kept misfiring. In 2003, Fran Selak's streak of improbable escapes took a final, unexpected turn. At 74, he bought a lottery ticket in Croatia, one of the few times he'd ever played. The numbers matched. Overnight, he became a millionaire, pocketing 6.9 million kuna, or about $1.1 million. Reporters called it the ultimate reward for a life spent dodging disaster. But Selak had no interest in yachts or luxury cars. He bought a modest house, then sold it a few years later. Most of his winnings went to friends, family, and charities. He said happiness, not money, was the real prize. I can survive anything, he joked, but I can't take a single kuna with me when I go. For a man who'd outlived trains, planes, and automobiles, sharing his fortune felt like the only logical ending. Selak's luck wasn't just about survival. It was about knowing when to give something back. Across these 10 cases, the facts repeatedly defy probability. The Guinness World Records confirm Vesna Vulovic's 33,333-foot fall. National Archives record Roy Sullivan's 7 lightning strikes between 1942 and 1977. Survivor lists from Flight 255, Lanza 508, and both atomic bombings identify the sole or rare survivors by name. Yet, official reports still cannot fully explain how a 4-year-old like Cecilia Sichan survived when 156 others did not, or why fate spared Martin de Jonge twice in the same year. While rescue logs, medical records, and news footage document each outcome, the precise reasons some lived remain unresolved. Expert analysis of crash dynamics and human biology offers partial answers, but much is still unknown. These stories underscore that even in an age of data and documentation, Luck and resilience can outpace explanation. The evidence shows survival sometimes breaks every rule we know.